Please welcome Jiang Chan, Chief Technology Officer, FPT.
Good morning, and welcome to the migration track. How are you? I hope you have a good time this morning, right? With the summits and the atmosphere here. Okay, so before we start, a quick introduction about APT. The company where I come from. So basically, we are the a global IT service company, headquartered in Vietnam, 33,000 people, 25 offices around the world. We do, over the years, many of the application services for our customers, product engineering, cloud journey, and also lately a lot of the digital transformations. So we recently, the first one and the only one so far, AWS Premier Consulting Partners, headquartered in Asia, and definitely, for sure, with the audited migration competency. Okay, so let's talk about mass migrations. Things like business drivers for mass migrations, some of the migration challenges, especially for the mass one. How APT we come into actions and we can help you with that, definitely with our approach, our best practices, as well as some of the successful stories. People talk a lot about, migrating to the cloud. But how about mass migration? Meaning like you do a lot of the application, you bring a lot of them to the cloud, as well as, important workload, critical workload for you to the cloud. Obviously, things like business agility, cost reductions, and ease of operations, and all of those things. But things like the challenges for those things are very important. You see, when you migrate, like just one application or two applications or something like that is totally different from, having like 100 applications or even thousands of applications. And the thing that you have to take into the consideration, for example, like the security, how to ensure the security for the migration of many of those applications, or other things like the application downtime, ensure the business continuity, as well as many of other key factors during the mass migration. Things, for example, like data migration problem, how to bring a lot of data to the cloud. Things like application compatibility for many of those applications at the same time, because you have so many applications running in parallel. And then you need to bring all of them to the cloud. So how APT we can help with that? Number one is for sure the mass migration strategy, consulting, and also delivery. This is very important because mass migration is not just about implementation. It's about the whole story from the very beginning to the very end of the mass migration. Second one is that a lot of the practice that we have been built over the years that we have packaged into our Citus Onion platform, which I'm going to introduce to you shortly. And last but not least, how about specialization in terms of certain workload, like SAP or Oracles and so on. Very important when you want to move all of them to the cloud. So let's first talk about the approach and the process to do that. So you see here, this is the AWS Migration Practice. There's a recommended approach for bringing the application to the cloud. I mean, here you see the readiness assessment, you see the readiness and planning, and the actual implementation for migration. And there's a lot of things that you need to do and then you need to follow. So over the years, when we have, been doing a lot of this for our customer, we also build the very comprehensive process and approach for migration, which the very focus on the mass one. And to give you a quick look at some of those things, for example, you see here, this is our decision framework for how to do the mass migration for those applications. You see, when you have like thousands of applications, moving in parallel to the cloud, then how you're gonna decide, for example, which technology you will use or which migration path you will use, lift and shift or lift and reshapes, and then all of those kind of things you would have to take into consideration for many of those applications in the portfolio. And you see in here, for example, we start with the identify the migration goal for the whole initiative. And going down to getting the requirement, to getting into the criteria, and then going to all kind of the decision to make sure that the whole initiative is a success. So zoom in a little bit. You see here, this is the example of how we identify the migration path, right? You see, many people talk about all of those lift and shift, refactors, and then rehost, and then so on, even retain, right? But what kind of criteria, drive that decision? So you see in here, for example, like legacy characteristics, or the cost, or the degree of the autonomies, and then many of other things you have to take into the considerations. And by understanding at the very beginning, the detail you need to get from those applications through the assessment process, then you have a very clear path to how to move them to the cloud. And this is driven by our package, framework and template for identifying those criteria, as well as how to apply those criteria into the action, the best practice for moving certain workload into the cloud. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here on some of the highlight activity, especially during the assessment phase. Because at the beginning it's very important to understand, how you're going to do that. So certain things like the application environment assessment, where we use the tools, our tools, and then also third-party tools to scan the whole environment, understanding about all of the application characteristics and so on. It's comprehensive, and it take care of all of the different characteristics of the application. Or at the very beginning, we do the compliance and security assessment, meaning that we do not wait until the later phase to do the compliance and security, because that is one of the very key concerns for most of the migration projects. We also do things like the proof of concept when we try to move a certain workload during the assessment to the cloud, for everybody to see whether it's possible, and whether we have the very good solution for doing that, taking into consideration all of those things like downtimes and then plannings and so on. Because with the portfolio like that, normally you have different categories, and then you have different migration path for a certain different bucket of applications. So gonna have some POC for those things. It's very good at the beginning of the migration projects. The fourth one I want to highlight here is the the business case creation, because sometimes it's a very, even that you have the budget for the migration already, but how to put those money into the actions and how to convince, everybody that the initiative is the feasible, and then we have all of those things thought out. So we also have our customer to build the business case in that, a lot of evaluation when we already have the result of the assessment, things like all of the costs and then returns on investment and so on, then we all take into the consideration for those things. So I've been talking about the approach and taking some example of some of the process and the thing that we do at the assessment phase. When we talk about implementation, meaning that you actually take the application and then you bring the application to the cloud, then best practices, all of those proven things are very important. How about this particular workload? What you gonna do with that? Or maybe with this type of application bucket, what is the best way to do that? And then there's a lot of the best practice that we have accumulated over the years. For example, like infrastructure as code, or things like centralized logging, remote monitorings, identity federations, and then very importantly, grows your DevOps cultures. Because when you talk about the mass migration, it's not about just one or two applications or some of the heroes that you have, but is the result of many of the teams, of the migration teams, where they work in parallel and then they do things together. So it's not easy to make sure that all of those teams are in sync and then they work well with each other and then comply to all of those security standards and so on. So, having the best practice and put those things into place are very important. And when we talk about the best practices, it's not just that we have the template and approach and so on for the best practices, but we also, package those best practices into the what we call the aptSitos onion. So think about the onion, right? Many of the layers, compliance, securities, assessment, and so on. So those kind of layers help you to ensure the migration, mass migration for your company. So basically, it is like a strategic landing zone for the application into the AWS cloud, where in here we will do a lot of things. For example, if you take into this one, is a quick look at the Citus Onion platform overview. So you see here, for example, we take into account, things like the management environment, or when you have like so many applications into the cloud, how about different environment for those different applications, how to ensure that the consistency between those environments and got the control from the management or something like that. And also how to make sure that how can I say, valid in many of the different scenarios. For example, like you have the application access from the cloud, or internals only, or maybe like restricted areas or something like that. So having those framework and approach landing zone for the different type of application as well as different type of workload in a centralized managed way is very important. And this is what the Citus Onion we are implementing to help you to do that. So take a look into, zoom in into some of the components of the Citus you see in here. I heard that, during the keynote, Central Group CTO, he mentioned about Terraform, for example. So here we also use that as a part of the Citus Onion. And you can see one example here, the environment for the container type of applications where, we take into account, the containers, the different type of environment for the application, for example, productions, non-productions, and make sure the load balancings and so on. And, through the Citus Onion, then things from the on-premise, from the cloud, and then, automation across automation and also like administration and management across all of those environments for the different type of the application and application workload. Another thing is very important is the identity access management and how we put another layers of the identity access management on top of something already have, for example, like thing already available at the infrastructure level in AWS, or things that already have at your enterprise organization for authentication and authorization and so on. So this to make sure that, for example, like we have the identity access management at the level of the application and down to that level is very important. For example, when you have an employee working in the migration stream, right? And then when he quit the company, we just have one actions, and then we strip out all of the access for him across all of those things, application, containers, AWS, and so on and so forth. So it's a very important, to ensure the securities and then access for the application when you doing the mass migration, because so many teams running in parallel. Another one to highlight here is on the application deployment, and then how to make sure that when you have so many teams working in parallel, they can utilize the infrastructure, they can utilize many of the things already have, especially things that we have already packaged in the Citus Onion to ensure that we have a very good application deployment. You can see in this diagram, for example, right, Jenkins, so we use the Docker repository, the ECR, and then we push all of those applications to the application cluster, the container cluster, and so on. And this is automated, and then this is the enforced with all of the management environment to make sure that all of them work in parallel, and then to make sure that the deployment is seamlessly and easy for them, and then easy to manage as well from the administration perspective. When I talk about the Citus Onion, so since there's so many layers for the framework, right, we integrate many of the tools. You can see here some of the name that we integrate with the whole solutions, securities, monitoring and loggings, and for sure CI/CDs and so on. So by having all of the best of the breed into the whole solution for the mass migration, you can be sure that you have all of the best functionality while you don't need to reinvent the wheel. So let's talk about some of the case studies, some of the success story, because I know when I dive into the the detail here, maybe we should talk at the booth or something like that, right? So number one, let's talk about one of the very big enterprise here in these regions, and then the portfolio is huge, 7,000 plus application in scope for the migration to the cloud. Obviously, you cannot do that, all of those applications at the same time, right? But it's a very challenging timeline for the whole migration. So 3 years, right? And then you can imagine how many of the application you have to finish in 1 year, and then down to 1 month, right? And then down to 1 week and about 1 day. How many applications you have to do that, right? So running in parallel, many of the team working together toward the goal is very important. And obviously, when we talk about the portfolio of more than 7,000 applications, should be very complex in terms of the different type of application, different bucket, and different workload that we need to migrate, right? there's a easy application where you just like bring to the cloud. You just do some reconfiguration. You just do some data migration with some standard tools and something like that, right? But in here, the enterprise also want to take an opportunity during the migration to re-architect some of their core applications. Then it's gonna very challenging in terms of you have to re-architect the application as well, recode and so on. And when FPT came into this one, definitely we bring our expertise in terms of the approach, of the assessments, and of all of the normal migration part and so on. But more importantly, our development workforce in order to serve that specific scenario where we need to re-architect and redevelop some of the key and huge application to the cloud to make it cloud native, and then it's not just a normal lift and shift case. So it is ongoing projects. So after 6 months, obviously since the kick off, and then you need some time to speed up and so on, right? Hundreds of applications already running in parallel, in progress. 20 of them already in productions. And then for those are in production already, 30% of cost saving for those applications, giving all of those infrastructures and operations and then so on own count into that. So it's a very promising progress, and we're gonna boom this up, and then we're gonna do way more application in parallel with way more workload for this customer. The second one I want to talk about is an energy company in Europe. So this is a little bit more highlight on the specialization. So when you do the migration, especially the mass migration, a certain very important, critical, visit critical application that you need to migrate to make sure that at the end of the day you close down the data center, right? And talk about this company is the number one in the area of the utility, and then that kind of area is very conservative, and with a lot of thinking about the risks and so on. And when we do the ERP system, meaning like the cores and very important applications system, like a center of the company is very critical to them. And having said that, the amount of data is enormous, 35 terabyte of data, and then more important, a lot of the integration point. Many of the applications, linking to the ERP systems, ranging from, I don't know, like so many, from marketing, from billing, from, so many things that running surrounding that. And when you migrate those applications to the cloud, it's not just that you bring the application, but you also have to think about the surrounding application as well, which one you also bring as well, and how about making sure the downtime of those applications to the minimums, and then how to make sure that once it's up and running in the cloud, there's no problem whatsoever with the integrations. And then that is what we actually did with the SAP systems. And it's huge in terms of not just the data and so on, but also on the product itself is the SAP ISU, so very specific to the utility area. And back at that time, there was like no practice or no guideline on doing for the SAP ISU. And definitely, we also do things as scope of this, like SAP ERP and SAP CRMs, and then BOBWs and EP and so on. So many of those systems that we also bring along the way. And at the end of the day, after 5 months of the projects, we completely closed down the data centers. And then now they operate 100% on the AWS. And then with that being said, you know, 20% of the operation cost saving for the company. This is very interesting. And I think most importantly, it's not just about having the cost saving, but when you do that, you lay out the foundation for the innovations and new technologies and so on for the many years to come. And then once everything is in the cloud, you know, everybody can utilize the cloud, everybody can utilize that as the foundation for innovation. And that is a very important with this company. So for the third one here, you know, I have a very interesting story to tell, but better not for me to tell about it. So here is a story about the journey of Masan Group. So Masan Group is the holding company of Masan Consumer, Masan Nutri-Science, and Masan Resources. It's a very big private corporation in Vietnam. And with that, I would like to invite Mr. Steve Nguyen, Deputy CEO and CIO of Masan Group, to the stage to share the Masan journey with AWS as well as the APT competency in the migration for Masan.
Nói là xong rồi đâu. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me? Okay. I have only one slide, this slide. I hate slide. So let I walk you through. I got 5 minutes plus, I think. So we are Masan Group. When I joined the company only do one thing, consumer goods. So we're doing noodle, we're doing fish sauces, we're doing soya sauce, beverages, and coffee. And we are the largest company in Vietnam to do so, and we are very good at doing it. Then we acquired the second largest also animal food company in Vietnam. So we are shipping now 2 million tons a year on animal feed. And if you put China aside, Masan now also been recognized as the largest tungsten provider in the world as well. Largest tungsten provider in the world as well. So let us focus a little bit on Masan Consumer only. In Masan Consumer, we do one thing right. We produce consumer good stuff, and we serve on everyday essential needs, right? And it's very simple to think about consumer good business. There are three character A in the way that we think, we plan, we do every single day. The first A is all about availability. So the product had to be there on the shelf, look clean, look beautiful, right? Anytime the consumer need, it had to be in the shelf of the supermarket, it had to be on the shelf of the mom and pop shop or in the restaurant. So availability is very important. The second A, even more important, is about assurance of quality. It has to be fresh, right? You don't want the food to be poisoned, for example. It had to be fresh, had to be tasting good, right? And the third A is also extremely important for us, which is affordability, right? 70% of our turnover coming from rural area, right? And why I'm bringing up the 3A? Because the 3A applies so well into our journey migration, our entire platform into Amazon in the last 3 years, right? And being a sauces and a noodle company, we learned one thing, that we are terrible at managing the data center. Absolutely terrible at managing the data center. And we never are and we never will, right? It takes forever for us to grow our capacity. I mean, it takes almost forever, 3 months to grow our capacity. When we sign our CapEx for new capacity, we're wrong in the first day, right? Disaster recovery, forget it. It's just too expensive, right? And if you want to run high availability for your database, your application, it's just completely out of your affordability, right? So we stuck. We outgrown ourselves. So this guy coming in, the FPT company coming in, and a few other seasoned professionals from Amazon Global, they came in and say, Steve, let's do something about it. Let's not struggle yourself with your data center as well. We have 4 data centers back then. And you know what? Today, Masan Group owns 0 data center. We actually have $0 in our balance sheet of the company. We own nothing. Everything's on the cloud, right? And that's how we run the $2 billion business. We run no data center whatsoever on the cloud. So how we started, it was scary to start with, by the way. You don't want to shut down the business. You don't want to have a 2-kilometer queue of the truck on the road. You don't want 2,000 salesmen on the road, got nothing to do. You don't want the salesman sitting there and don't know what to sell and how much to sell your product. You can't afford to do that. It's scary to get started. And our architecture was very complex. So we have a part of our ERP running on Oracle stack in US. We have our entire distribution and gamification running in Windows and Linux platform. We've got SQL platform, non-SQL platform, Couchbase, Elasticsearch. It's pretty complex architecture back then. If there was one thing that FPT company and AWS experts gave me back then, it wasn't their expertise, but it's one thing they gave us and gave me personally. They gave me the courage. They came in and they say, Steve, let's do this. This is an offer. We go half your cost and double your security. Would you take it? I say, oh, yes, please. Right? So I took that. It took us 3.5 months to do, we do all sort of planning. We retrofit about 200,000 lines of code to make the system compatible with Amazon platform back then. We have about dozen of scenario. We tested, we retest over again, and we made very important decision. It will not be a partial migration. It will be a big bang, right? And that was, I still remember, that was the 9th of January 2016. That was a beautiful weekend. We took 26 hours, and we actually do the migration for the entire distribution system, the entire, everything. You're talking about 80 nodes, all right, in the system with about 6, 7 technologies differently. Everything moved at one go from Vietnam into Amazon in Singapore. The next morning, every come to the office, to 2,700 on the road, a couple of thousand people in the office. They start the day at 7 o'clock in the morning. It just works. Nobody knows what the hell happened yesterday. It just go into the cloud, sitting there and work perfectly well. So what we learned from there, I think what we learned big time from there is gain your courage from your partner, gain the courage, and do not do partially, do it at one go, right? If you have the courage, do it at one go. You will gain a lot from bringing everything from your on-prem into Amazon services. Since then, our architecture run 3 times. Our capacity almost double now. And we actually do have our cost, have our TCO as they promises. I think I have to give them a big thank you for that as well. And what next for us? I think what next for us is all about UX, right? With the huge marketplace in Amazon and the capacity they're offering at this point in time, I think UX for business intelligence, machine learning for manufacturing, and also for the self-out in the marketplace will be the next thing that I'm going to focus on. So I wouldn't know that how much more I should cover, but I wish you to have the courage that I did in the past. And I congratulate FPT for becoming the first premier partner in ASEAN, and I wish you guys have a great day.
Maybe, before we finish this section, you shared a lot about, how you brought the infrastructures and everything to the cloud, right? Zero, ownership of the assets. But I also talk a little bit about once you have everything on top of the cloud, it will be like a foundation for the innovations and a lot of the new ideas and new opportunity and so on. So maybe you can share a little bit about, that part. I mean, once we have already in the cloud and then, it's very interesting.
All right. It can be addictive, right? So you can be addictive once you are on the cloud. You can spin out a node, you can try crazy thing out, you can run your machine learning algorithm tomorrow and shut it down immediately if you will. You can try a Redshift, see if it can replay your data warehouse or not. You can try out your S3. You can do virtually almost everything. And you can be addictive sometimes, yes, you can, right? Sometimes it's good to be one, and sometimes it's bad to be addictive to that as well. And yes, it gives you the courage. You can try things out. You believe it or not, our entire security footprint is hosted and managed by Amazon as well. We actually run our entire security layer 2 for our entire company in Amazon now as well. So you can try a lot of other things out. I still remember that was the Lunar New Year back in 2016 as well, when we start our gamification. And when we start game, everybody in the country getting excited and play the game together with our sales forces. We're running our capacity in the morning, and it took us half an hour to raise up the capacity immediately so everybody can enjoy the first day of the new year with the gamification and start buying our product in the first year. So it helps a lot. I just couldn't imagine back then if I'm not in Amazon, it would be a disaster back then. If you launch a new product, you launch a gamification, and nobody can access your services, it just become a disaster.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you
for information, and also thank you for spending your time with us. And I hope that you drop by our booths to discuss more about this. Thank you.